You are watching Woodstock Public Access TV, Channel 23 on your Time Warner Cable Scumbox, also Channel 23 on your Triple Play Box, which means you're getting ripped off threefold, or Channel 20.2 on your digital TVs, cable tuna fish, or streaming live on the World Wide Web at woodstocktv.org. And now, live from the enclosed patio, which serves as the shoebox studio of Woodstock Public Access, butting up against the Woodstock Community Center, it's time for Further Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's Paula Gloria.
Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and as Randy Steele just said, this show is Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. The show that you just saw before this one, if you're watching in Woodstock, was with Steve Romine, and we were going over the issue of Apple Computer releasing a new patent that says they can knock out Wi-Fi in sensitive areas. That means if there's a protest, if there's any police brutality going on and people are videotaping that from their iPhones, all of that signal can be just jammed. And Joe and I and Steve were talking about that. And then later on, Steve was talking about the whole issue of smart meters and how here in our local area, I think it was a famous person's cousin actually had a state trooper attend an employee from Central Hudson, and at gunpoint, a smart meter had to be put on their house. And then Steve was talking about the opt-out program. Now, behind that, I had put in the Give Peace a Chance, Save the St. Mark's Landmark. What I'm showing is that even our architecture is affected by the swindling and the bank fraud. So the smart meters is a very important issue because it deals with advanced technology. And what I want to do is just read a page from somebody who's talking about what's on her mind. Then I want to switch over to the internet. We're going to see about 20 minutes of Werner Bock. He's a farmer up in Canada, and you can see what happens when cattle are microwaved and why you don't want to be anywhere near technology that you can't control and that could damage you. So before we go into the Werner Bock, I'm going to read to you something that's close to my heart. The thing grinding the hell out of my craw these days came from my hearing a genuine investigative reporter being interviewed on a book he has written as well as his website. The book is named Going Postal: How Dianne Feinstein's Husband is Selling Out U.S. Post Offices to His Friends, Cheap. I always heard when people referred to our post office as being broke, other people respond, the post office isn't broke, it always makes loads of money. Well, they used to, except for a few years ago when a California representative named Darrell Issa wrote a bill and had it passed, railroaded through, at midnight Christmas Eve. The bill forced the USPO, United States Post Office, to put into escrow all benefits for their employees. I think they have around 15 million, such as medical, retirement, vacation pay, into escrow for the next 70 years. So yes, I guess the post office is now broke, and Senator Feinstein's husband is going about selling them. These are historic landmarks, priceless in many cases, but he sells them ignoring any assessments. He also takes the realtor fee from both ends, both buyer and seller. One of his sales was made to Goldman Sachs, who is a partner in his realty firm. How many conflicts of interest can one man have? And who is the great enabler of fraud against not only the history of our country, but the American people themselves? Darrell Issa has what could be a unique distinction, I hope, and that is of being the only felon in Congress. That, of course, means he is unable to vote in an American election. He claims to have committed a youthful infraction, having stolen a car. His brother, I believe, took the rap for it and did time. However, I looked Issa up on the internet and found out he stole 3 cars, did some banking fraud, and has more on his record. He did go straight, and is now worth $450 million, I believe. Probably a lot has already been added with the kickbacks he's getting from the post office deals. But the initial amount was made by his primary business. He created an auto alarm company. Wonder how he thought that one up. And he seems to have named it after his own character, Viper Auto Alarms. Can't say he's devoid of irony, would you? But if you take a look at the book, it can be downloaded for $3 or $4. 2/3 of it is taken up with describing the post offices that have been stolen. They are often assessed at, and assessments are always lower than the true value, 50 to 100 million, and he brokered them to his friends for 2 or 3 million. I was watching Larry King the other night on Russia Today, speaking of hack political operatives who just won't go away, and his guest was Donald Trump. And the crux of the interview, Trump just acquired the U.S. Post Office in Washington, D.C. Can you imagine a more important U.S. icon? And it was handed over to Trump to turn into a hotel. So now when you're looking at the Washington Monument and turn your head a few degrees, you'll see perhaps the most beautiful post office in America with large gold letters splashed over it, spelling out TRUMP. Love you guys. Keep up the good work. So that was of interest to me because it shows how an important buildings like the post office are being demised ostensibly because of everything going to the internet. But you had a lot of safeguards built into the post office for national security reasons. First of all, in times of national security, the most important person is the Postmaster General, believe it or not. And when we had issues of bank fraud, that is Louis Asserino, the man who purports to have bought my apartment on the courthouse steps with a non-judicial sale, sent one of his notices to get out from the super, giving the super in the return address. So I asked the super, because I knew the super didn't live in our building, and the super said he never sent it. So that's mail fraud. So I was looking for the Postmaster General in New York City. I looked it up on the internet, found out where he's supposed to be, went there to the main post office in Manhattan, and they say they've never seen him there. So you can't get a hold of the real person, and I think that these buildings are actually records of due process. In Berkeley, California, very proudly you saw a beautiful Postmaster General's office. But now when I went into Berkeley with my camera, they were very uptight. They didn't want the camera there. So much for that being a public building. So I think right now we could go on to the Werner Bock in Canada, and then Randy Steele and I will dialogue on that a little, and I'll read something on the latest on the common law versus civil law for those of you who feel a little bit discouraged and depressed at what you're going to be seeing about microwaves. Are we ready, Felicia?
Ready?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Werner Bock, and I was born in 1942 over in Germany, exactly in Lower Saxonia, southern tip of Lower Saxonia, about 50 miles south of Hanover, and the town is Nordheim. My parents were farmers at the outskirts of the town, and my educational background is 8 years basic school, 2 years business college, and 2 years agriculture college. I decided to become a farmer because I figured there were lots of people starving in the world. There still was a place for farmers. Against the advice of my dad, who told me, "You're crazy that you want to farm." But anyway, when after I finished business college, last 3/4 of a year, my brother had left the farm, so I had to finish my business college and do the farm work, keep the farm going. After finishing business college, I did full-time farming, and I bought a farm that was basically on the brink of bankruptcy. I brought it back into production, got the field into good shape again, and got the dairy herd producing at acceptable levels. And so for about 10 years I was farming over there. But I didn't see any future there because most of the land was being farmed on a lease base, and whenever the owners decided they could make more money with selling the land for building lots, I would lose a piece of ground where I'd put a lot of work in, and I could foresee already the end where there wasn't any more farmland, enough farmland around to go around among us farmers around the town. So in 1968, I became aware that New Brunswick was actively looking for European farmers to come to New Brunswick and take over where the local farmers had left off. And the provincial government didn't want those huge tracts of what we consider to be decent farmland to be lost and going up in orders and reverting back to forest land. So in early 1969, I came over here. I bought with the Farm Credit Corporation a farm. Well, it was a good-sized farm, a little bit over 300 acres cleared land and a little bit 330 acres woodland. And the farm had been basically cleaned out by the previous lessee or owner, and he stuck the government with no payments for 8 years, stripped the farm, no property taxes paid, and it had become an embarrassment for the Farm Credit Corporation. So they approached me if I was willing to buy the farm, and I did it, and I put my nose to the grindstone. I had something to look forward to, and after 5 years, when I thought I had myself well established, that's when some local jokers figured I wasn't supposed to be there, and that's when the hate crimes really started out. My farm is located just outside Petitcodiac. It's a village in southern New Brunswick, about halfway located between Sussex and Moncton. I had to go on a steep learning curve, and people wanted to tell me, local people that didn't farm at all, they wanted to tell me how to farm and so, but after a while I found out that, the general rules apply about you look after the soil and after the land, and the land will look after you. Basically, brainwashing didn't work with me. I always checked and back-checked. This wasn't what some people wanted to see. They wanted to boss me around, and I didn't come into another country to be bossed around. But anyway, I tried to be a good neighbor, was helpful to my neighbors. Whenever they needed help, I would help them. And the first few years, I still got a sense of the way Maritimers used to work together. But then in the mid-70s, when my trouble started out, a bad crowd moved in. And they figured they could throw their weight around and bully everybody. And if they wanted your place, you had to just step aside and let them have it, And I don't think that should be the way in a country that calls itself a bastion of freedom and a free country. Good afternoon, to whom it may concern, and I think it should be of concern to everybody, about the misuse of directional energy devices. My animals and I have been at the receiving end now for the last 35 years. 41 years ago, I came over from the old country to continue farming here in New Brunswick in eastern Canada. And I thought I had found the perfect country when I came here. But within 5 years, some strange things occurred, and I wasn't completely out from the backwoods, and I had a certain amount of knowledge about the sciences, physics, chemistry, and so on. And I had attended Ecological college, and I had been raising over in the old country livestock and milking cows. And in 1975, suddenly animals would rapidly lose weight, sometimes up to 300-400 pounds in a couple of days. And the symptoms were clearly symptoms of poisoning, like they had got something real corrosive inside, and this was covered up by the veterinarians. But anyway, that was the background. And then it was covered up by the RCMP. And they made a few wrong turns, basically where they compromised their positions in their departments that would have opened them up to criminal prosecution. And ever since, my life here in New Brunswick has been a nightmare. About 15 years ago, I went back into livestock, and the killing of my animals continued. In the meantime, there were many other acts of sabotage, but they concerned mostly field crops and my farming operations, equipment and so. But I just want to cut it short. Today we want to deal with what happened to the animals. Here's the first heading. It's shallow burns. When you notice the first picture is a limo cross cow, and you noticed the two burns in the nostrils, like somebody had buttered out a cigarette. The next one is the next few pictures are of 3 calves that have that occurred overnight. Perfectly round burns where the hair was singed off. Now, with what I will show later on, at the time, mad cow disease was a threat to the livestock industry. We didn't have any mad cow disease here in eastern Canada. But I reasoned, when they focused this energy that burns their hair off on their forehead, and at times it went deeper into the tissue, basically when they cooked their brain, then those animals will display symptoms of mad cow disease, of brain damage. Well, anyway, the picture number 4 is a calf that had been gassed, and then they focus the energy on its front leg, and you see the hair peeled all off and the skin peeled all off, and it got lame. There's a second picture of that animal. Then another picture, it had a burn on the hind quarter. Always consistent, the same size burns, where I had seen from the house next door, that's built right there within the pasture. There used to be an old schoolhouse. And where I had seen a deep red intensive light beam, about 1.5 inches in diameter, that matched the size of those burns on those animals. A deep red light beam coming out of the front door of the house, beaming at the cattle that were resting on the side hill, and subsequently cows had holes cooked right into the udders, 1.5 inches in diameter and up to 2-3 inches deep, which caused the death within a week of 5 cows. They died within a week. I got several more animals there that have survived it, and the scar tissue and the ruined udders still can be seen. Now the next picture is a red white-faced limo-cross calf with a burn right on the nose. And those burns, those energy beams directed to the nose, you will see further documentation. I directly contribute to the death of at least 250 head of cattle. You will see it later on. We call it a death beam. Then you see a picture of my kitty. About 3 months ago, I was coming out, and her hair was singed off in circles. She survived it. She's still living, but she's just about as thin as she can be. Now, what kind of sick freaks do something like that to animals? But this is just only a fraction. Then you see the brown calf. Overnight, next morning, bleached out spot on the noses. This is contributed to the frequency that's being used, what I call a death beam. Now, most of the animals got killed by what I call a death ray, where the atmospheric air is being manipulated with a directional energy beam focused on the nose of the animals, and where the oxygen is being changed into ozone and the nitrogen is being oxidized. So the animals are breathing in this manipulated bubble of air, which is made up out of high concentrations of ozone and nitrogen oxides. Ozone when combines with the moisture of the respiratory tract and the mucous membrane, it forms peroxide, which is clearly shown at the bottom, where you see that picture of the lung that had turned completely white with hemorrhaging around. Peroxide, it bleaches and it's corrosive. And those circles on the noses appeared, picture 1 and 2, overnight. The other picture shows a brown cow with her mouth open. Another way what they were doing, they were focusing the beam onto the open mouth, and where there was more the oxidization of nitrogen is through heat producing frequency. Externally it would cause burns, like cigarette burns, like when we first started out, where I showed the burns on the nose of the animal. Here they focus it on the tongue. Oxidization of nitrogen forms nitric acid, is salty, so the cows keep licking and licking and licking. And they get this corrosive mixture inside, in the lungs, digestive tract, urinary tract, and it does massive damage. Those animals, they rapidly will thin down, as you see on this cow, and become unthrifty. And where this frequency is being used, those spots where the frequency had been focused on, they pigment, and they take, regardless of the pigmentation of the animals, they take on a black pigmentation. Now the next one, same picture, heat producing frequency, oxidization of nitrogen being focused on the nose of the animals. Sometimes I would come in the yard and the cattle were standing at the gate and they had a brownish, reddish brown liquid on the nose and they kept licking. Now, nitric acid is a reddish brown liquid and it's salty. Energy being focused on the nose, pigments. Where those burns were, it pigments black pigmentation. Same way as what happened where the holes were burnt into the tits, black pigmentation. And you see this animal, by nature, it does not have black pigmentation. And before that incident, it didn't have any black spots on the noses. But on the arrangement of pictures down at the bottom, where they are grouped in 6, I've documented it there, the black pigmentation. Now, this is externally, but what it does internally to the animals. The next one is a picture of the lung, massive hematoma. The next lung, bleaching out on the inside, on the outside of the lung, caused by peroxide. It seeps right through the tissue and causes massive corrosive damage to the internal organs. Corrodes the blood vessels from the inside, especially nitric acid, and causes massive internal bleeding in the internal organs, as what is documented, plus massive corrosive damage to the inside lining of the stomach of the rumen. That's what the next picture shows. But one sign that the animals or the calves had been gassed normally was when I was coming out in the morning and the animals were down, that were completely healthy the night before. The mouth is white as snow, tissue goes in shock, and ice cold. They either die outright of shock or they recover temporarily. The mouse turns warm again after about a couple hours, but then there is the internal damage to which they succumb most of the time in the next 2 or 3 days, sometimes within the next 7 hours. Now, where this energy had been focused, what happens to the vegetation in those areas when it had been focused on the vegetation? Then there are circles in the grass where the grass turns purple. Oh yeah, I forgot. There you see, to the left, you see a lung. This cow got gassed she was in an excellent shape, fairly aggressive cow. I had to watch myself when I walked through the herd that I didn't startle her or she would come right after me, you know. She was very protective of her calf and so on. A month earlier she had been gassed. She became very docile, lost rapid weight. And then a month later, she got gassed the second time, and she wouldn't get up anymore. So I had to put her down, and within half an hour, I opened up. And as you see on the lung, you see already the brown coloration of the lung, where basically the tissue had died off from having been gassed a month earlier. Now, I got ahead of myself. Next thing, where this energy had been focused on the vegetation, the next day, purple coloration. Months later, excessive amount of nitrogen there. In the pasture where the animals had been gassed, within an hour when they urinate, the urine is so corrosive it burns the grass off right away. And generally for 3 to 4 months, no grass will grow in that spot anymore. Next one, you see a calf, all bloody on the hind end, and the skin peeling off and everything. You imagine the damage that had been done to that poor little animal inside. But this one was lucky, it survived, and it healed up again. Most of them, wherever this corrosive material concentrates, if it concentrates in certain parts of the bowel or certain parts of the stomach or in the esophagus, it corrodes the whole right through, and the animal is dead within hours. This calf here was fine the night before. It was a few days old, and as you see, beautiful cow, lots of milk. I was coming out in the morning. The rest of the cows, they had retired towards the edge of the woods. They were standing underneath the tree. This calf stayed behind. And I had already a bad feeling when I saw that. When I was coming out in the morning and I saw that calf there. So I chased it up, and it had a few times it stumbled, but then it joined the mother. At noontime, that little fellow was dead. Now, I opened it up immediately. You see the hemorrhaging on the heart, and you see the hematoma of the lung. Lived about another, what? From being gassed 7 hours, you know, and then you see the picture of one of the heart with massive hematoma, massive hemorrhaging. Then the next picture is the inside of the stomach that's stripped right out. Then you see a picture of the little calf of the liver, and again the lungs, peroxide, ozone exposure, and nitrogen dioxide exposure. Now, about a month later, in that spot where I found the little calf, a patch of thistles came up, and every blossom was white. That indicated the presence of a strong sterilizing chemical that had dissipated into the soil. Normally thistles are pink, and this is what I've observed time and time again. The next picture, you see where you see my hand over a large sawtooth aspen or poplar leaf. The residual nitrogen causes in some species excessive giant growth. I've seen leaves where this energy had been focused that are normally about 2 inches wide, grown up to 14 inches wide. Now the next picture, you see a cow that had survived this modified atmospheric air, the death beam. Those where that had been focused on the nose, later on those spots, they pigment, and that frequency or the combination of frequencies takes on the tissue later on, takes on the natural pigmentation of the animal. As this stuff moves through the body, it permeates through the tissue, big patches of hair fall right off, causes in some instances arthritis, as you see on the next picture, the little calf.
What I want to move over to right now is the common law versus civil law, and we got this from the people that are doing the grand jury, the National Liberty Alliance people. You can go to nationallibertyalliance.org. Basically, in this 20 minutes, what you see is a farmer, and you see all of the microwaved cattle. Over quite a number of years, about 300 of his cattle have been profoundly harmed, and it seems as though the veterinarians are frightened of whoever's doing it because they won't come forward and say that there's anything wrong. But it's very interesting when you look at the actual evidence. They're trying to do a lot of smearing on his personality and on his character, saying that he's claiming that aliens are doing it. He's not claiming that. He's just saying he doesn't know who's doing it, but he understands what the technology is. Now, I want to read to you Rebuttals to Anti-American Bar-Indoctrinated Positions, Common Law versus Civil Law by Brent Williams, A Brief History. Two fundamental traditions of law and government are active among humanity, each manifesting contrary ideals, the common law and the civil law. The common law rests upon justice administered by scriptural principles that presuppose and guard against the inherent imperfections of human reason. Once we have Randy's attention on this, I know the fact that they're talking more about scripture is, Randy will have a different way of looking at this. But just flow with the stuff on what they talk about God and so on.
Okay.
The civil law, on the other hand, justifies its methods by presupposing and appealing to man's notions of perfected reason. The common law tradition governs only a handful of countries and is fundamentally consonant with Scripture, acknowledging the divine eternality of law as the measure of all things. The civil law tradition, on the other hand, governs most modern nations and is fundamentally Babylonian, trusting human reason as the worthy measure of all things. And a lot of people who get into law point out that most nations don't last that long, and our nation is a very young nation, and it seems it's facing probably some of its most difficult growing pains, which is why it's important to understand how America got into the position that it did, both the good and the bad. The common law tradition recognizes the necessity of human administration of law and government while providing safeguards against man's weaknesses. The common law, however, does not teach that we elect or appoint men to govern us. On the contrary, the eternal law is our governor and the governor of those elected and appointed. Therefore, the duties of those administering government are purely ministerial. God binds magistrates and other officials to remain consonant with His character in word and deed. To arrogate more to elected officials is tantamount to idolatry. The common law has fashioned its methods to seek and derive law from the revealed mind of God. By contrast, civil law's ultimate source is the mind of man. In the common law tradition, all law is derivative. Men must derive law from God. On the other hand, under traditional civil law, men must make the law. That is, law is a product of the human mind, underived from any source superior to humanity. Because the common law focuses on relationships, and this is important, remember you hear about a jury of your peers? Applicable common law standards are determined by first recognizing the kind of relationship that exists between contending parties. Once this question of fact is determined, out of this relationship arises a certain level of rights and responsibilities. Civil law, on the other hand, is primarily determined by ascertaining the will of the state as expressed in legislation. The question of relationship determines law, rights and responsibilities concerning life, liberty, and property. If the will of the state is the foremost consideration, however, private and individual determination of relationships to choose one's relationships and freedom to define one's associations by delineating one's commitments, contracts are forfeited. Therefore, common law is not made but discovered by first recognizing the duty demanded by different categories of relationships, while civil law is decreed by will of men or a man as the embodiment of the state. In the common law tradition, law is of eternal origin. Therefore, all men and the state are subject to it. By contrast, this is underlined, civil law tradition holds that because law is the will of man as expressed in the state's legislation, law may change as man's desire and will changes. Further, since the state is the source of the law is subject to the state and not the state to the law. Further, any freedom of private relationships, such as association or contract, is subject to impairment of the legislative will. Now they go on, feeble arguments from the status quo. So this is going to be all the wrap of why they're blocking the human beings throughout the state who want to assemble and have common law, grand juries and indictments and indict a lot of the corruption that's going on. So the status quo is saying, there's no legal authority. This is a rogue band of citizens with no legal authority, says Wes Oliver, associate professor and director of the Criminal Justice Program at Duquesne University School of Law. Do you know how to pronounce that? D-U-Q-U-E-S-N-E. Duquesne University.
No, I have no empirical knowledge as to, but I think by the spelling you're pretty close to it.
Okay. Anyway, to what extent there was ever a common law grand jury system that was self-creating, there no longer is. No supporting authorities offered. Rebuttal. In the state Supreme Court case of United States versus Williams, Justice Antonin Scalia, writing for the majority, confirmed that the American grand jury is neither part of the judicial, executive, nor legislative branches of government, but instead belongs to the people. It is in effect a fourth branch of government governed and administered to directly by and on behalf of the American people, and its authority emanates from the Bill of Rights. So Justice Antonin Scalia went on to say in U.S. versus Williams, the grand jury is mentioned in the Bill of Rights but not in the body of the Constitution. It has not been textually assigned, therefore, to any of the branches described in the first three articles. It is a constitutional fixture in its own right. And then he gives all of the citings there. But I'm going to be racing on here because I want to hit the action points. Status quo says common people are not capable of making such decisions. No supporting authorities offered on that either. Rebuttal. Whenever people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. Thomas Jefferson. The constitutions of most of our states assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves in all cases to which they think themselves competent. And this is Thomas Jefferson, a letter to John Cartwright, June 5th, 1824. Trust in the jury is, after all, one of the cornerstones of our entire criminal jurisprudence. And if that trust is without foundation, we must re-examine a great deal more than just the nullification doctrine. And that's Judge David L. Basleon. Okay, here's another status quo rap. Legal experts say that in 1946, the federal rules of criminal procedure were established, doing away with the common law grand jury model. No supporting authorities offered. And then he gives the rebuttal. The Court of Appeals rule would neither preserve nor enhance the traditional functioning of the grand jury that the common law of the Fifth Amendment demands. This is 1990, U.S. versus Williams. And he has more, but I want to race through on the action point. Status quo. Grand juries must be approved by the courts. Rebuttal. The grand jury is an institution separate from the courts, over whose functioning the courts do not preside. We think it is clear that as a general matter, at least, no such supervisory judicial authority exists. 1990, U.S. versus Williams. So that's, again, the Supreme Court. Justice Scalia. In fact, the whole theory of its function that it belongs to no branch of the institutional government, serving as a kind of buffer or referee between the government and the people, and then tons of citings on that. Status quo. There is no statute or procedural rule that allows citizens to convene grand juries. No supporting authorities offered. Rebuttal. There is no statute or procedural rule that prevents people from convening grand juries. And again, Scalia, the grand jury requires no authorization from its constituting court to initiate an investigation. So, status quo. And there were more cites on that. Unless common law grand juries are officially recognized by the courts, prosecutors offered presentments or individuals subpoenaed by the self-formed grand juries would not be legally compelled to cooperate. No supporting authorities offered. Rebuttal. Prosecutors are not offered presentments. Presentments are filed with the Supreme Court chief clerk, and once filed cannot be removed. Anyone interfering with an official proceeding commits a crime under U.S. codes, and it gives all of these U.S. codes. And then I'll just read a little thing here. The fox in the hen house. If the government can select the jurors like they do now, it will of course select those whom it supposes will be favorable to its enactments like they do now. And an exclusion of any of the free men from eligibility is a selection of those not excluded like they do now. It will be seen from the statute cited that the most absolute authority over the jury box, that is, over the right of the people to sit in juries, has been usurped by the government. And this is Lysander Spooner, Trial by Jury, page 92, 1852. And men must be governed by God or they will be ruled by tyrants. That's William Penn. So I'm curious how Randy would address that, because you don't deal with any models of God, right, Randy?
I think the people right now in the country that are ruled by God are the tyrants, from my experience.
Yeah, from what you're saying. But you were a little bit occupied with Felicia when I read this first part about common law versus civil law. And common law is saying that there's an authority higher than reason. I would say as human beings, even when you make art, you're trying to imitate the beauty of nature, and in imitating it, you sort of glorify it. You highlight that which is most beautiful. It's not that what comes out of man's mind is not as valuable as natural law. It's just that we're evolving and we're progressing in our relationships. And I would say part of the evolutionary process is we want to minimize harm and damage to the society and move over into creating more intellectual property and having more prosperity, having a freer exchange of knowledge, and certainly having a lot of free speech. So what do you think about all of that, Randy?
As far as everything regarding the common law juries, I appreciate what's trying to be done, but I think there's a certain amount of overlooking on why it needs to be done. Our laws in this country were established by our forefathers back in before the turn of the 19th century. Shortly after we, as a country, achieved our independence from the tyrannical rule of the British. And what I see about all of this is I have, as you properly anticipated, a big problem where we start throwing out the rationality, or being prepared to throw out the rationality of our forefathers, who established both the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, in which the grand juries are in fact granted. And that same Bill of Rights absolutely sets down a separation of church and state. And the rights and the privileges that we have enjoyed in this country for a majority of the part of certainly the last century have been those that were established by our Constitution, and then what has been established as the court systems and the legislative system. The problem is, and why we're at this level today, is that starting in 1981, and with the stealing of the 1980 election from Jimmy Carter due to a lot of totally treasonous actions, that the Supreme Court of the United States and the courts, the mainstream courts that were now coming up against the United States, have been, for a matter now of 40 years, absolutely packed to the gills with judges who do not believe in the tenets of the Constitution. They're willing to throw that out in order to allow the rich elite class to make a lot of money and abuse all of the rest of us because they have the money that gives them the power to do so. And that's where the
due process is supposed to prevent.
That's what but due process over the course of the last 40 years has been completely eviscerated by people who really don't believe in the Constitution. And some of those people have been put in there with the idea that they're going to rule more in what is interpreted as being God's law rather than the constitutional law of the United States. So all I'll say, to keep it brief, is just that if there is to be power in these people's courts that are being set up, then we have to make sure that they're set up to ensure everybody's right. Because if there are people out there, and there are people all over the country who are interested in establishing God's law as opposed to and above to man's law, then what you're going to have are whole groups of people who are going to be discriminated against and are going to be are going to be treated with tyranny and disallowed of their rights because there are these little chapters in Leviticus that some people pretend is God's law, when in fact it was written by men 2,000 years ago, where the rights of anybody who is condemned for any practices of Leviticus, and I could get down to whether it's directly against homosexuals or whether it's against people who would eat flesh on Friday. They're all, or bottom feeders from the ocean. They're all in there, and what law, here's my question, what law are you going to look at? Are you going to take that and consider that God's law, which is nothing more than some group of men's interpretation going way, way back, and it's even questionable how accurate that interpretation of God's law is? Or are you going to say that we're going to run by the Constitution and that these people's grand juries are going to go back and use the Constitution as the basis to defend our liberties, that are all of our liberties that are being trampled and placed on, and not put our common fate in the hands of some group of people's determination of what is God's law by a God that is certainly questionable as to whether in fact there is one or not.
Right. I mean, something I learned a long time ago when I got into cellular telephone licenses and they were going to be worth millions of dollars, we were sort of ejected into the world of lawyers. And, you know, how people value a license is really a privilege. A license means you have the right to do something that's otherwise unlawful.
That's right.
So we got the right to broadcast a cellular telephone signal in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And that was the first time I, really got involved with big money or things that were worth a lot. In rolling that out, the most important hurdle that we had to overcome was the Public Utilities Commission, to make sure that we served the public, that there was an emergency number that people could call to and things like that. All of these things seem to be falling apart here today in this country, and people aren't really understanding why these things are so important. But now that you see it falling apart, you begin to understand why to make a telephone call is so important. If a telephone company now has the right to offer you service, if that service is erratic, you never know when the call drops, might be just at a critical moment. And now with all of this texting, I'm hearing about people are not getting texts in timely ways. All of this becomes important. So when we talk about God's law versus natural law, my experience was being in court. If you say, take a guy like Michael Jordan, when Joe said, "You're now in dishonor," he apparently was visibly upset, which means being in dishonor is something that concerns him. So my question was, when people are being sent to prison for many long years, how do the people who are benefiting from sending these innocent people, because they haven't harmed anybody, innocent by the Constitution, how do they sleep at night? That's what I was wondering. So when Michael Jordan seemed really upset when Joe said he was in dishonor, I also noticed in that court when we first said we didn't stand under the charges, the clerk, she woke up. Otherwise it was just this routine thing. Joe said that just like people going off to the slaughter, bang, here's your fine, bang, here's your fine, just like that. So when they talk about relationships, that common law is based on relationships, it means when people started to show up for us in court, there were human beings in that courtroom that had real relationships with each other, as opposed to creating legal fictions that are civilly dead. That's why in housing court, I couldn't get the judge to read her name into the record because it's as if it never happened. If you have to go back and redo something, in other words, there was fraud involved and real criminal intention to swindle people, to take something from somebody without them being fully informed, which is why whoever writes the contract, if there's a question and something that's not clear in a contract, you always give the favor to the non-preparer of the contract, because the preparer of the contract might know ways to swindle, but the non-preparer goes into it more innocently. So I would say the whole question about God would be a divine connection. When you start to feel that you understand why you're here, you know what your purpose is of life, your purpose in life is, you know why you're in the community that you're in, you behave in an honorable way to that community, because not only do you have a purpose, there's a purpose for that entire community. So when that entire community gets in sync, you're not going to have a disturbing of the peace. I think here he was also talking about the word barrator. In criminal law, a common mover, exciter, or maintainer of suits and quarrels, either in courts or elsewhere in the country, a disturber of this peace who spreads false rumors and calumnies, whereby discord and disquiet may grow among neighbors. I mean, isn't this normally what's happening when you think of suing? Joe and I never sued Kevin Richards, the man who dragged me out of the passenger side of the car and slammed me on the hood of the car as he was handcuffing me when we were only pulled over for a tail light. It's because Joe and I are interested in getting at the root of what the problem is. So again, that's what I say about relationship. If somebody is in a community and he's just stirring up trouble, bringing in unnecessary lawsuits and trying to swindle and connive and frighten and harass and intimidate people, you don't want that. You want to quickly get to the heart of the issue. You want to be judged by a jury of your peers, not by a jury of the peers of powerful interests stronger than yours. Any comments on that, Randy, or about the whole, what is, that's what I say a divine connection is. I felt it in court. You know where law is supposed to go, and you can start to line up your arguments that way. Whereas if you're just depending on plea bargaining and deals and knowing the judge and the prosecutor will do this in the back room, and then of course now we know they're manipulating the trust accounts that most people don't even know they have, has to do with the birth certificate. And this is something I hope in the future to deal with Karen Hughes, to see when she has a solution to get rid of the corruption in the World Bank and so on, by bringing on a new gold-backed currency. I'm questioning, because the Federal Reserve, not one iota of it has anything to do with gold at all. It has to do with the full faith and credit of the American people. And that's why the less productive the American people are, the less they're working, the less value the dollar, the Federal Reserve note has, and the less value it has, the more of them you'll need to buy things. That's why the more Americans that are out of work, the higher the prices are. You would think if people were out of work, that the prices would go down, but they don't. They go up. And they go up because it's backed by labor. And it's backed by the labor of people, mothers who gave their children over for birth certificates, who didn't understand what they were doing. But the rest of the world is understanding that this debt is impossible to pay back. You have about $32 trillion that has been given to the bankers, and yet the banks keep selling off the mortgages as bad debts to the lawyers. They buy them up at 10 cents on the dollar and go about their swindling game through their buddies in the court system, everybody feeling you've got to keep bandaging this up because all hell will break loose if you go with due process. But I say, anybody who can articulate the argument, who really understands it, Those cases should move forward on their merits, and I say that all board presidents and all boards throughout New York City who are running co-ops and are securitizing the leases, and the banks are double doing it, and as Raja said, sometimes there's 40 empty trusts. It's being done so many times. He found out that his $500,000 loan generated $92 million in other investment instruments, all generated by his signature alone, which was sent down to Timothy Geithner, and it cut loose, an order at the Federal Reserve to issue more money. When you go to the bank, you think you're borrowing money. What you're doing is you're going in as a beneficiary of a trustee. They know how to deal with, of a trust, they know how to deal with the trustees so that they get that credit unloosened, and then they give you another paper for you to sign because you've been deceived that you took something from them, and if you don't pay it back, they are going to be harmed. They have to come to court, prove their standing with the documents, and prove how they've been harmed in order for them to collect lawfully. That would be going through it by common law. But today you're doing it more with, the good old boy system. If a lawyer does know this argument about the bankruptcy of the United States, that they have no standing to bring you into court, and he brings that argument up, the judge will call him forward to the bench and he'll say, if you pursue this line of reasoning anymore, you're going to be disbarred. And this is one reason why people who want to really beat the banks really have to do their own case themselves. They have to learn their rights, they have to learn the arguments, because any lawyer, any member of the bar is going to lose his job because the bar was set up pretty much to perpetuate that type of swindle, and our founding fathers understood it, which is why there's a missing 13th Amendment saying that we shouldn't be judged by anything other than our peers, including judges. Judges should not come from a privileged, special lawyers caste. We should be able to be judged by our peers and our cases to go forward on its merits. Any comments, Randy?
As a matter of fact, a lot. I think the most brilliant thing in any of the arguments that you or Joe have put up and educated me with is the idea of not standing under the charges of a commercial court. In the linguistic trickery where they ask you if you understand, when in fact that's meaning that you stand under and that you give your authorization and authority to the court to have a ruling over you. Right. As far as the other things regarding the Federal Reserve and whatever, yes, I'm absolutely in agreement that the Federal Reserve pretty much is only there to forestall the economic downfall that would occur in the United States